Hi, it is a privilege to welcome you to Stand Up and Redo. It is a soulful, honest podcast hosted by me, Petra DeMuse, a woman over 50 who is navigating life's most tender transitions with courage and grace. I have weathered the storms of 2 divorces, raised children into adults, embraced the joy of grandchildren, and learned, perhaps for the first time, how to stand comfortably in my own solitude. Each episode explores the profound wisdom that comes with age, the lessons etched in heartache, the beauty found in unexpected places, the laughter that bubbles up in the quiet, and the peace that settles when we stop running from ourselves. With reflections on love, loss, aging, happiness, and the sacredness of this one wild and precious life, Stand Up and Redo is a companion for anyone who's learning to live fully after everything they thought would last has changed. This is a space for late bloomers, deep feelers, and fierce survivors. Come for the comfort, stay for the truth, and leave a little lighter each time. I'm going to talk about addiction in this episode. This is going to be raw. It's going to be real, and it's going to be from my heart. It's going to be about my feelings on my experiences, and it's not to hurt anyone. It's not to call anybody out. It's actually to help you if you're suffering from loving an addict, being with an addict, knowing an addict, wanting to help an addict. I feel like you're going to relate to what I'm talking about. It might make you angry, it might make you sad, it might make you hurt. You might not even care about what I'm saying right now. And I bet the only reason that you won't care about what I'm going to talk about right now is maybe because you haven't known an addict. Because if you have, you're going to relate to this. I know it. I know it. I want to talk about addiction, what it is. Honestly, does anybody really know what causes it, how it comes to be? I know people who I have been extremely close with that I know were not suffering from addiction until they were 30 years old or close to 30. And it just will blow your mind. I feel like addiction can hit anyone at any age, in any place. And you can never just say, I don't suffer from addiction problems, I'll never be an addict. I feel like I myself could become an addict. I feel like you could become an addict. I don't feel like it favors or anybody has control of it. I do feel like there definitely are people who maybe have tendencies for addiction. I know there's a lot of science and research and knowledge about addiction and the DNA even that people have, genes. It's ingrained in certain people that they might have more of a chance of becoming an addict. But it can hit anybody, and I truly feel that way. And that is me. That's what I've gained in my life through wisdom of living through it, living with it, and living after it. I had an addict one time tell me it was the first thing they thought about when they woke up and the last thing they thought about when they went to sleep. And the only time I've ever felt that way was when I was maybe in love, woke up with this, I love this person, and thinking about them, and then going to sleep feeling that way, thinking about that person because you maybe have like a love or fascination with them, or they bring you joy and you just can't stop thinking about them. But I think about drugs and alcoholism and the ugliness of it, and I will talk mostly about drugs and alcohol in this episode. I'm not going to talk maybe about, I might mention certain things other than drugs and alcohol, but the focus is really going to be on drugs and alcohol in this episode. So, and I will tell you about it in stories again. I love telling stories. So we will tell probably little stories throughout, short little stories to get my point across. And in those stories, I'm going to try not to identify any one person by name. I'll probably, a lot of times, say this person or this situation happened, but I'm not even going to give them fake names or anything. So just bear with me as I try to do this gracefully, but with focusing on helping you to understand the feelings you're going through maybe, or the hurt, or to understand that other people have gone through it too. So I remember when I was a young woman, I knew a person that I loved was an addict. It was slapped right in my face, finally. It took a long time. I had subtle little hints that this person might be an addict that were getting bigger and bigger. And I was ignoring them, and I was denying that they could even be real. But imagine this. Imagine you're paying your bills, and you do your budget, and you have your budget every month. And suddenly you wrote out checks. This is the old days when you wrote checks out. You didn't do things online. All of a sudden you have phone calls about checks bouncing and certain maybe people not getting your payment and wondering where it is. And you're like, oh, well, I did mail that payment. I know I mailed that, or I know I sent that check off. And you're like, what is going on? And you go to the bank, because in these particular times, you didn't have internet to jump on and look through your banking statement. So you drive to the bank, and you go to the bank teller, who knows you because, it's a small little town. You live in a town where everybody knows everybody, and also the town is a town where everywhere you go, you're going to see someone you know. But you go and you're talking to the bank teller, and you're just like, I really want to figure out my balance. I don't understand. I had over this month, I've paid, and I had figured out it was $4,000 worth of bills. That's a lot, And all of my checks were bouncing, and I didn't know where the money was. So this woman looks at me, and she goes through, and she does this big printout of all of the transactions that happened over the past month. And I look at all these ATM withdrawals, and I can see that every single day, for so many days, there were multiple ATM withdrawals in Atlantic City, which is 40 minutes from my house. Atlantic City, of course, is a hub of drugs, drugs, sex, alcohol, gambling, all that stuff is in Atlantic City. And you know what? Drugs are everywhere. Drugs are everywhere, not just Atlantic City. But I figured out a particular person was driving to Atlantic City every day and taking money out of the bank account. And lo and behold, that money was pretty much gone. So that was the big surprise. And I knew the person that was taking the money out. And I went to talk to the person, and they denied it, and they didn't admit it. And then I felt frustrated and overwhelmed, how, what do you do now? You have the person that you need to help you not even admitting that the money is being taken by them. And then on top of it, you have no money for bills. And, you're living paycheck to paycheck anyway. We didn't have a lot of money anyway. Often was waiting for that one paycheck to come to pay the bills for that month. So, setback, big time. Then, come to find out, I'm going to work, and every day I had a 30-minute, break. So I'm trying to figure this money debacle out, because now I'm in survive mode, to pay the bills. And I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to pay the bills and what I'm going to do. And I remember thinking, okay, all that money is gone. Then on top of it, there were other things happening, like checks even being overdrawn and written and bounced that were cashed maybe at like the grocery store, but then the person got the money, but then, so I was even beyond, I was minus in my checking account. And I, in fear, I worked at a hospital and I had a 30-minute break, and I thought I have to run to the bank, or I had to call the bank, or I had to do a million things on my 30-minute lunch break. So I started losing weight rapidly, and within 2 weeks, I think I lost 10 pounds. I know it sounds unreal that could happen in 2 weeks, but it did. It happened to me. I lost so much weight in 2 weeks because I couldn't even eat. I couldn't function. I couldn't figure what was happening out. And I was talking to my girlfriend at work, and she pushed me into the bathroom because all these people at work were telling me how great I looked. Oh my gosh, Petra, you're losing so much weight. You look great. How are you doing it? What are you doing? Oh, wow. Like, of course, I'm not going to tell people I'm in a crisis at my home. Of course, at work, I'm going to pretend like everything at home is fine. Of course, at work, I'm not going to share this because this is something that is very private, although I'm sharing it on a podcast right now. But it was overwhelming, and this friend recognized it, and she actually pushed me into the bathroom at work. I know it sounds really weird, but everywhere when you're in the hospital, there's people all around, and it's hard to have private time to talk. And I think she just decided, I need to talk to this girl. And she's standing there, and she's like, what's going on with you? And I told her that I was in a crisis, and I didn't know what to do. And I needed to do something. There were certain things I needed to do quickly in this situation. I'm going to tell you at this point, I knew the person was using drugs. There were some other little details to the story that I'm not going to talk about in this part of the story, but I knew I had to get a divorce. I didn't want to get a divorce. I wanted to get a separation from this person because I thought if I could get a legal separation, then we could work on our marriage later and we could get back together. We could not be apart. We could be together forever and not be apart. But this person said, you need to go to a lawyer right now. She shoved me in the bathroom, and I told her what was happening, and I told her, I don't want to get into the details with you, all the dirty details, but there were many more details that led me to know that I needed to financially figure out how to stop this person from taking me down financially, which is sad. And I said, I don't have money to go to a lawyer. I don't have any money to go to a lawyer. And she said, I know a lawyer you can go talk to. You need to have $100 to go talk to her. And she wrote me a check for $100. She said, here's your check. I want you to go talk to her today. And I called the woman from my lunch break, and I made an appointment with her to see her that day, the lawyer. But before I decided to call the lawyer, I want to tell you something else that was happening, because I don't want you to think just because there was $4,000 withdrawn from my account and I couldn't pay the bills that that's the only reason I would get a divorce. I had actually known that we had some other money saved. We had some mutual funds, and I think we had maybe I can't even remember how much. I wish I could remember, but we had gotten some blue chip stocks, Microsoft, and through the years had this little chunk of mutual funds saved. It was our only savings in Microsoft stocks, Lucent stocks, and there was a third stock. So we just had bought these 3 stocks for fun back when the stock market was really taking off. This was in the late 80s. And then, of course, the stock market had taken a dive, but the money was still hanging out around where it was when we had purchased the stocks. So this was the only money that I had available to me. And it was probably about, at that point, $8,000. And I didn't have anybody to borrow money from when I was
At that time, I didn't have any money to borrow money from. I ended up not in my family, I should say, but I did. Let me erase that. I did end up borrowing money from somebody, but it wasn't an immediate family member. It was someone that helped me out, who I was able to pay back later in time, much later. But it did happen. I did pay that person back, and I felt so relieved. But I'll tell you this. What happened was this person that had pushed me into the bathroom said, "Do you have any other money saved? Or, you've lost that $4,000. They were obviously desperate to take away the bill money. They're probably desperate enough to try to get any other money that they can get." And this was an interesting story. And this is how I believe God looks after you. And you can tell me you can believe whatever you want when you hear this story. I had my 30-minute lunch break, and I ran to the bank to find out if my mutual funds were being cashed out. I should say our mutual funds were being cashed out. And I got in line for the bank, and I asked the bank teller, I said, "I need to find out about my mutual funds. Can you just tell me if they're there still, or if anybody's tried to get them?" And she goes, "Oh, yes. It was exactly, this is the irony of it, I think it was exactly $4,000 or $6,000 that was being cashed out. But it was the exact amount that I would need to save my ass. And excuse me for that, but to save my ass. And I said, I need to cancel that mutual fund transaction. And she said, and I said, this was going to be a big process. And she said, "I can't do that." And I said, "What do you mean you can't do that?" She's like, "I can't do that." And I said, "Well, look, I need to get back to work. I have 30-minute lunch break. I can't mess around with my job. I need it. I have like 10 minutes left." She's like, "Listen, you go back to work, and I want you to come back here at 5 o'clock when you're done." And I said, "The bank's closed." She said, "I know. I want you to come back here at 5 o'clock. So I got out of work at 5, and I drove over to the bank, and it was all closed. Everything was locked up. Nobody was there. I walked up to the bank door, and I knocked on it, and the woman unlocked the door. And her face when she unlocked that door was one of warmth and comfort and love. She walked me into her office, and she sat me down, and she looked at me and she said, "I know what you're going through. I know exactly what you're going through. I've been through this." And she goes, she knew that I was going through someone just being in a crisis, I guess, and needing money and just getting all the money or trying to get all the money. And she said to me, "I can't cancel this transaction that's happening with this mutual fund. It's already in play. It's happening." And she said, "But I can change the address of where this money's going." And this is the part. I said, "Well, what address is it going to? Where was this money going? This is my money. What address would it be going to other than our home?" And she's like, "It's going to this person's address." And she told me the address, and I knew the address. It was this guy that I knew was a drug dealer in my town. I knew it. And I was mortified that that's where it was going to go. And she said, "I can divert this to a different address, this money, and it will go to a different address." She said, "That's the only thing I can do." So I said, "Well, that's what we're doing." And she made the address go to my friend's house, a friend that I needed to go to their mailbox. And not many people had known about actually, a lot of people in town knew what I was experiencing. And I'll tell you why when I finish this little part of the story. The money then was diverted to a friend's house, and this was one of my friends that knew what was going on, or knew what I was going through. And that money was exactly the amount I needed to pay, catch up with the bills for that month that were all bouncing and, everything was going awry. And that money was exactly what I needed. And because this person had not made their truck payment in like 3 months, and they also were going to lose their vehicle if I didn't pay that off too. So I took this chunk of money, which was for this large truck payment, and made that truck payment for that person. And then also, for us at the time, I also was able to get caught up with the bills to be on time again with the bills and not lose, not have the electric turned off and not have things happen, anyway, catch up with the bills. You all know about paying bills. I don't need to get into those details. I'm starting to ramble a little bit here, I think because I'm getting a little bit emotional about this. But I want to tell you, so I'm telling you about basically a crisis, right? A crisis. And these are crises, is that even a word? That so many of you have been through if you've dealt with a person who is an addict. And remember what I said. This person wakes up in the morning and the first thing they think about is the addiction, and the last thing they think about is the addiction. And I can tell you this, not one of those people that is in this trap of addiction wants to be there. I can tell you that person doesn't want to be thinking about that when they wake up. And they don't want to think about that when they go to bed at night. And I can tell you with certainty that they don't have a choice all the time. They don't have a choice. They wake up and they do things that they would never do if they weren't in the midst of their addiction. They do things that they would never do if they weren't suffering from addiction. They might never have been a thief, might never have stolen a dime from any person. And when they're in the depths of that addiction, they will do that. And it could be the person that you could tell me and look right at me and say, nope, that person wouldn't do that. They would never do that. And guess what? Yes, they will. Yeah, they will. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit. I could go on and on with these stories, and I could go backwards and forwards, but I'm going to keep going forward with the story. I went to that lawyer, and I remember I went there that day. As a matter of fact, it was that same day, and I sat down with her, and I learned a little bit about the laws of the state that I was in at that time, and it was that you can't, I said, I have credit cards. I said, we have a lot of, we hadn't had we had gotten out of having bad debt for years. We had actually been in a situation where we didn't have credit cards because we had used this consumer credit counseling program to get out of an exuberant amount of debt we were in. And I was so proud of us because I think we paid back like $8,000 worth of credit card debt that we had gotten ourselves into in our 20s when we were very, very young. And I had gone through this consumer credit counseling program that it took me 3 years to pay back, and I paid back this huge chunk of money. And I'll tell you, then at that point I had gotten all these credit cards, and we had gotten out of credit card debt, and we then had great credit. We had really good credit. And I knew that we had these credit cards that we hadn't been using at all ever, because I think we had learned we actually learned from consumer credit counseling not to use credit cards willy-nilly. And, getting older, that's one thing that you do learn. You gain wisdom with things like that. And I was terrified that this person that was in a crisis was going to get a hold of the credit cards and get a hold of all the, already the mutual funds were dissipating or gone because they were being taken, and it saved me actually because that money was able to get us out of all the debt that we were in with the bills. But the lawyer said, I want to get a legal separation because I need to not go down financially with this person who's going down quick financially, obviously. And she said, there's no such thing as legal separation in this state. You have to file for divorce on this day. And I can tell you I didn't want to file for divorce. I actually didn't. I wanted to get separated, work all this out, have this person go for help, because I really thought they were going to go for help, and then be back together with this person. Well, the lawyer told me different and said, you have to file for divorce, or any debt that this person accrues will be yours. But the moment you file for divorce, the day you filed for divorce, and I'm not encouraging people to file for divorce, that's not the point of this story at all, but she told me that I wouldn't be liable for his debt. So that's what I did that day, and lo and behold, it was interesting because that we got immediately completely separated. The person immediately had moved out and was living somewhere else. And I thought I would see that person get better, because that would be like maybe their rock bottom was all this stuff happening to them. And I watched that person just spiral worse into the addiction from afar, because I wasn't with that person at the time. But of course, living in a small town, you get to hear every dirty detail about that other person that you love, because every person makes sure to tell you, and they do. And anyway, so what I want to tell you is I want to go into addiction, into not believing it. I want to go into denial. So it hit me in the face. It actually hit me in the face with a lot of things all at once, with that story with the money being gone. But I want to talk to you about this little section here. I want to talk to you now about how it was trying to hit me in the face, and I was like, what? I didn't just get slapped in the face. No, I don't believe it. It's the denial part. I want to talk to you about how you can be living the person that's closest to an addict, the person that is right there with them, the person that is loving them the most, the person that is eating dinner with them, the person that is talking to them every day, and be the last person to know that they're an addict. And this isn't just for spouses or partners. This is for moms and dads and siblings too. Because often it's the mom or the dad or the siblings or the friends that truly are the last people that see it. I had come home from work one day and was bopping around the house and kept finding vomit around the house. And I'm like, what the heck? What is going on? There was in my office, I had a little office. Well, we had an office, and in the office there was vomit in the trash can, and just these odd places, like vomit in the kitchen trash can. Someone had vomited in the toilet, and I'm like, what is going on? In my house. And I approached some of the people that had been at my house that day, and everybody denied it. And I was like, okay, someone's vomiting in, why would someone, if they were sick, not say I'm sick, or not even clean it up afterwards? That was one day that I was in denial. That I also didn't understand addiction back then. I mean, when you go through withdrawal, you vomit. I didn't understand it. I didn't understand at that point because I hadn't lived with it. Well, I guess I had lived with it for a long time in my life, but I didn't want to believe that that's what it was. I had a woman who was an acquaintance, but not an acquaintance. She was actually a friend. At the time, we were hanging out because she was a relative of a relative, and we were in the same circle. And she told me that she had overheard. She was just sitting in her car in a parking lot of outside in Rio Grande, which Rio Grande is another place where I feel like there's a lot of there was a motel there that a lot of drug addicts and stuff would go to, and it was in Rio Grande, and there was just a little bit more of a hub of drugs. But like I said, drugs can be right down the street from you. They're not just in Atlantic City and Rio Grande. But she had said that she was in this parking lot in an area that was known a little bit more for drugs. And she overheard, she said the people didn't see her sitting in the car, and they had walked right near her car, and she could hear their conversation. And they were talking about getting my person who I loved heroin. And she was telling me that she knew that they were talking about this person that I knew who I loved, and talking about getting, and like I said, I already told you, talking about the drug deal being for that person. And I looked right at her and I said, "Oh, no, you didn't hear right. That's not what they said." I looked right at her and told her she heard it wrong. I was like, okay. Then I was in a line. I remember I was exhausted and I had to go get medication at either Rite Aid or CVS for my kids because one of them had a fever, and I had to go pick up antibiotics late at night. It was after work, I remember, and I was so tired because I did these really long 10-hour shifts at the time. And at the time I was even working night shift. I worked 11 p to 7 a at the Coast Guard base, and then I worked in the day at the hospital. And I would pull these 7 to 7 shifts. We did all these different shifts at the hospital. We did 8-hour, 10 hours. It was in the surgical unit. And I remember it was a 10-hour shift, and I was so tired, and I had to go pick up antibiotics for one of my kids afterwards. Because I remember this day exactly, because I remember there's certain days in your life when things happen that you just remember the whole day, and this was one of them. I was in the line at CVS, and this woman, who's real sweet, we were all a fishing community, so her husband was a fisherman too, and we were talking about things, and she was talking about her husband, who was an addict, and she knew he was an addict, and she was unloading on me a little bit about him, and just kind of talking to me, and suddenly she goes, I know you're going through this too, and you understand exactly what I'm talking about. And I looked at her and I said, "What do you mean? I'm not, I didn't understand what she meant." And I thought, I'm not going through what you're going through. What are you talking about? That's what you're going through. I don't have this problem. It was just these surreal moments that just hit you in the face that you still don't believe it could be true. I remember things being stolen from my house. I came home one day and from work, and I had a digital camera, and back then you didn't take cell phone pictures on your phone. You had these really nice cameras that you would buy, and a lot of times, this one I remember was $600. I remember that's how much this digital camera cost me, and it was this more high-tech one than other people had, and I was real proud of it. I love taking photos. Photos are a thing I just love to do, and it's just, I don't know, I love editing photos. I love taking them. And I had this camera with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pictures of my children on them. And my children were little. They were at this time, maybe 9, 7, or 9, 8, and 5 or 4 or 5. They were little. And what would happen with your digital camera was you would take all these pictures, and on your camera you had a little, either maybe an SD card inside the camera, or you hooked your cord up to your computer to save your photos onto, back then we would save our photos onto a disc. I remember I would save discs, and that's how you would, on a DVD, you would save your photos that way. So I had a huge accumulation of photos. I think there were well over 300 photos on my camera. It was probably almost maxed out, because that's what I would do. I'd max out the photos, and I'd upload them and max it out again. And I think I came home and I kept it on my little china cabinet. I always am the kind of person that keeps everything in the same place. If you've ever heard me on my reels, I talk about having everything have an address in your home so you can find it easy. And that's kind of how I've always been. I'm like, this is the spot for my camera. Always put it back right here. And my case was there, and I went to open the case to take the camera out, and the camera wasn't in the case. And I'm like, wow, that's weird. The camera's gone. And I thought maybe a person that knew where the camera was using it. Well, nope. Nobody knew where the camera was. The camera was just gone. All my pictures were gone. And it actually was harder that the pictures were gone than that the camera was gone. I just wanted to say, hey, whoever took my camera, can you just give it back to me so I can upload those pictures first and just take the camera away. It was heart-wrenching to see that camera was gone. And I knew it was stolen. And then we had really expensive saltwater fishing rods, which are pricey, rods and reels for saltwater fishing in our garage. I think we had 3 or 4 of them. They cost a lot of money, and they were really nice rods. And I'm in the garage, and the rods are gone. And I'm like, where's our rods and our reels? We had them neatly, set in the garage. And I'm like, where'd they go? And I ask everybody who might have known where they would be, and denial. Nope, I didn't take those rods. Nope, I didn't take those rods. Nope, I don't have those rods and reels. Nope. And I knew someone stole them. And I remember the person that I knew in my heart, I kind of knew they stole them, but I didn't want to believe it because I didn't want to believe that person was struggling for money or needed money for drugs. I still didn't want to believe it. I still didn't believe it. And I didn't believe it. And that person, this was a big eye-opener for me because I was like, that person told me they suspected the little boy who cut our lawn stole them because he always talked about how he loved them and he'd get excited when he'd see him when the garage was open. And that person told me that really thought that kid stole the rods. Well, this kid was probably about 90 pounds and he had these giant thick glasses, and he was the sweetest boy. I used to pay him to do all kinds of things around the house, and he was so dear. He would cut my lawn, and he would wash my car for me. If he'd be like, hey, can I do anything for money today? And I'd be like, yeah, wash my car, I'll give you $5. He was just so sweet and so dear. And he was a little kid. And of all the kids in that neighborhood, which, trust me, I had some kids come play in the backyard that I did find had a joint in their pocket. No lie, these kids were literally 8 and 9 years old. The one little boy was showing my kids in the backyard that a weed, and I was like, I can't believe this is happening right now. That's my sidebar story. Part of the reason I moved away, sadly, from where I lived. But that's a way sidebar story. But it is related to drugs, so I thought I should share that. Back to the stealing stuff. It got to be where in my own home, I was hiding my pocketbook. I'll call it a purse. A pocketbook's an old lady term. Sorry I said that. Purse or my wallet. I was hiding my purse or my wallet in my bedroom, hiding it, not just putting it on the bed or putting it in the closet or putting it on my bureau. I was taking my wallet out of my purse and hiding it between the mattresses or hiding it behind the bureau and then locking the door. I didn't realize the stress I was under with having things stolen from me until I'm going to jump ahead. I moved away to my own home and lived in my own home with my own 3 kids alone, away from addiction, away from where I didn't know just one addict, just for the record. I knew multiple addicts, and they were all in and out of my house. And they were all people that I loved, and I always will love dearly, and I still love. And I I remember I didn't realize the stress I was under until I wasn't under stress. I remember, and I'm going to describe this physical feeling. Imagine being a pole, and you're like a pole, and you're a pole standing in place. And imagine having all these things tied to the top of the pole, and they're just hanging there, and these weights are just pulling and pulling and pulling on this pole. So the pole is you, and imagine your shoulders with just this weight hanging on it, like something's pulling right arm down, something's pulling your left arm down, something's like hanging on you, like clinging to your back, like this heavy, heavy weight. And then imagine all of a sudden, all that weight is just released from you. And your arms are light and they're not being pulled down. And that weight that is just hanging on your back, it's just gone. Well, that's how I felt day one when I stepped foot into my new home where I lived alone and I had the only key to that house. I remember the first day I hung my pocketbook, or I keep calling it a pocketbook. I'm trying not to say those words because I feel like that's an old lady term. And I hung my purse on the chair in my new dining room. And I breathed easy, and I walked easy, and I felt free of feeling fear that things were going to be taken from me, stolen from me. And I think I'm going to have to do this podcast in more than one episode, I realize. I realize that it's taken me so long just to talk about this part. And this part really is about not even just the realization of finding out a person you love is an addict, because I didn't even get to that part really yet, because I'm leading up to just it. But I guess I'm talking about one part of addiction is having things stolen from you. So overall, this episode of this podcast about addiction is about having things stolen from you. There you go. I'm going to sum this one up with that. I'm going to tell you the part I want to make this the theme of this podcast. I'm giving you the theme at the end of the podcast. But the theme of this series, of this part of the podcast, is going to be this. It's something that a physician told me when I was going through this crisis before I moved to my new home, and I was going right hot and heavy through the crisis. I went to my doctor, and she was a beautiful woman who I had actually worked for, and she took care of me when I didn't have insurance and when I did have insurance. And I remember when I had to pay her cash, sometimes I knew she didn't charge me what I should have been charged. But then there were times in my life I had insurance that I could give her my insurance, but then there were times I didn't have insurance. And I had to take all 3 of my children to her, and I know that she didn't charge me. Either way, she was my doctor, and I was sitting in her office, and I specifically went to her to tell her of the anxiety and fear and a little bit of depression that I was suffering from. And I told her what was happening to me. I said, I'm trying to figure out how to deal with these things that are happening in my life with addiction. And it wasn't just one person, it was more than one person. And I was trying to figure out what I was going to do about it. And she made this statement, and this is the theme. This is the theme of this series of podcasts. It was, Petra, you can either live with addiction or you can live after addiction. And I'll elaborate that in time. But she was basically telling me, you have a choice, and it's simple. Well, it's actually not simple because you don't really ever get away from addiction. But as time goes on, I'm going to talk more about this statement because this sentence, you can live with addiction or you can live after addiction, has resonated with me through life. And I had to make a choice. And I'm going to end the podcast, this particular episode here, right here. And the value of this that I learned about stealing and theft and the stand up and redo for me as a woman who has gained wisdom from this is that I don't blame the addict for stealing. Wow. I blame the addiction for stealing. And I learned to deal with grace of theft later in my life, a lot later, I ran into other addicts in my life, and I remember it was, I'm a woman who is in healthcare, and like 10 years later, a lot of years later, after dealing with having things stolen from me and the weight just on my shoulders and the release when I had things that I was in a safe place, I had a person in the healthcare facility steal, not from me, but from the institution that I worked in. 2 institutions, not just one, 2, and I won't even get into those details because I want to save a lot of I don't want to talk about the institutions that I worked in a bad light. But I remember talking to the 2 people that stole, and I was able to approach a conversation with these 2 people that stole drugs, I'll say, with love and grace, and not with anger or accusatory, but just to talk to them about their addiction in a way that I don't know if they ever gained any, but I was able to have conversations with them that were loving and kind about their addiction. And in my heart, I don't know what purpose God has for me in the future after my experiences, but I truly hope that I can be a graceful, loving support for people that are suffering from knowing that things were stolen from them, and just knowing that it's not the addict that wants to steal that stuff. It's the addiction that is taking them down this horrible path that is not a path that they want to be on. Trust me on that one. So my stand up and redo is that I can redo the way that I react to things like that without anger now, and I can be a kind support to others. And that's my stand up and redo. To be continued. Thank you. Hi, I'd like to give credit to Sarah Gebhardt for the cover page of this podcast. This podcast is a work based on the personal experiences, reflections, and memories of the speaker. The events described are true to the best of the speaker's knowledge and recollection. Some names, locations, identifying characteristics, and timelines have been changed or altered to protect the privacy of the individuals involved. In some cases, composite characters have been created or dialogue has been reconstructed based on memory. The intention of this podcast is not to defame, malign, or harm any individual or entity. Rather, it is to share the speaker's journey with honesty, vulnerability, and integrity. Any opinions expressed are solely those of the speaker and are not intended as statements of fact regarding any person, group, or organization.
Listeners should keep in mind that human memory is inherently subjective and selective, and while every effort has been made to ensure accuracy, this podcast reflects the speaker's perspective and truth. Thank you.